Hello, my name is Mark Taylor, and welcome to the Education on Fire podcast, the place for creative and inspiring learning from around the world. Listen to teachers, parents, and mentors share how they are supporting children to live their best, authentic life and are proving to be a guiding light to us all. Hi, Jeffrey. Thank you so much for joining us here on the Education on Fire podcast. I think one of the things I've learned the most over the last sort of 6, 7, 8 years of podcasting is that the environment that we're learning in is such a key part of that. And I think the idea of discipline, how we control the environment, all the different sort of tangible and intangible threads of that are really important. So I think this is going to be a really important, fascinating conversation. So yeah, thanks so much for being here today.
Really happy to be with you, Mark.
So give us a sort of a little idea of where your sort of professional life has been. I know you've been involved in education in lots of sort of different roles there.
Mm-hmm. So I've done a lot. I've been doing this a long time now. And in some ways, I think I'm trying to just upload everything I've done for almost 50 years till I can say, okay, I'm walking off the stage or I die or something. So I want to get some of that stuff out. So I've worked a large part, but not my whole career. But the beginning of it was working with students who have been traumatized, abused, neglected, exploited. They were kids who were addicts. They were kids who were thrown out of their house, kids living on the street. So I got to think a lot about what's the context of school to make schools, as I often say, safe and brave places for kids where they want to come to this space. There's a nice line, what's necessary for some is good for all. So what we did to make schools work for kids like that are actually great practices for most kids. And so I've been a principal, I've been a teacher for the last, I think it's like 14, 12 years now since I stopped being a principal. I've been writing, trying to get all the stories I had for all those years. I've been putting them into books and articles, consulting with teachers and principals, helping schools do initiatives. That's kind of my favorite thing to do, helping a school go from a current practice to something that is more of what they like, which is more than just having somebody come in for a day and do a workshop. It's about really getting into the gears of the school. Love doing that. Um, Love mentoring teachers. Love mentoring principals. Helping people get into the career and or mid-career people to help them remember why they came into the career. The work is hard in schools, and to be able to revive your spirit and your purpose in the midst of the hard work that schools ask us to do. It's both everyone will say it's a wonderful career, it's an amazing career, and it's also really difficult and really compromised by the institutions. The kids are great. The kids are the kids. One of my mentors said to me once, the kids are just who they are, Jeffrey. What are the adults going to do? And I always, I have one superpower, Mark, which is that I've met and kept great mentors in my life who have really helped me understand being a parent, a member of my community, a principal, a teacher. And I think at this point in my career, I know my role. I've outlived most of them, sadly. So, somebody's got to step into the vacuum. It looks
Yeah.
like it's me right now.
Yeah, absolutely. And
Yeah.
I'm always curious as people sort of their careers develop.
Hmm.
Like say you were a principal, you weren't tempted to just sort of do that forever and a day. Did you sort of feel like that sort of amount of time had sort of run its course, and like I say, the other skills and the learning that you'd been able to provide was better sort of spread amongst other people? What was that sort of catalyst?
Oh, it's a really good question because really it was more that I love being a principal. I want to say I really like. Yeah, and I was in a wonderful setting, and then I got a toxic boss, and I was really unhappy and really suffering. And I remember one day saying to a colleague of mine, "This isn't good for my health." And as soon as I said that to myself, I was like, "I got to get out of here." And I had another colleague who was working as a consultant and knew my work and said, "There's work for you out here. I can help you get started." And so I negotiated leaving my school. And so in a way, I could have stayed doing that. It's been great to have found this next chapter of my work, which I love doing and feel super charged up by doing it. I'm lucky in that way. Yeah, I would have stayed had the situation been better. But who knows? Maybe at some point I would have said, enough of that. I've got to go off and do this other work.
Yeah.
So happy to be doing it. It did give me a chance finally to write. It's really hard to invest a lot of time in writing when you're a parent and working full time, especially as a principal. So, in however many years it's been, 12 or something, I think it's been 6 books and about 30 articles. And it's just, I gotta, like, oh, I forgot that story. That story becomes an article, something
Yeah,
like
yeah.
that.
Yeah, and I think it's really interesting, that idea of a toxic environment. And I think that
Hmm.
the slight sort of other side of that coin is, I remember someone saying to once, when they were sort of looking for a job, you're so hell bent on wanting to get the job that you kind of forget, is it a job that you actually want? Is it a setting
Yeah.
that you want? Is it going to be fitting with you? And I think that's the great thing I've always found as a sort of a freelance self-employed person, is that even one particular environment isn't really supporting me, there's lots of other things that I'm doing that are. And it can be a trickier life doing it that way, but certainly a rewarding one, as
Right.
well. So
So, just around that notion of taking care of yourself in your career. So, I was working in a public school here in the Boston area in the States. And do you have tenure? The notion of tenure in England, which
not in the
is,
same way as there, I think.
so I'll explain it in case people don't know, that after a certain number of years, depending on your school system, you get what's called tenure, which means you're kind of more protected. They can't just come in one day, tap you on the shoulder, and say, "You're out of here. We found someone better." And there's more a process of moving you along if you're not in a working well. So getting to tenure is a really important threshold to get to. You're not looking over your shoulder every day and worrying about making a mistake or something like that. And I was in a system in which I was getting more and more dis alienated from the practice of the school. Felt like it wasn't really what I wanted to do with my work. But I got tenure and the next day quit. And everyone in the system was like, "How could you do that?" And I was like, I realized that I didn't say this to people directly, was I don't want to become you in 20 years,
Mm.
in which, you're just mostly frustrated and bitter and complaining about everything. I expect a better career for myself. So it was another time where I luckily found a much better place, but I had to take that risk. And at that point, I didn't have kids, I didn't have a mortgage, so it was a little easier to take the risk. But yeah, don't get bitter, don't get stuck. I mean, that's one of the great places to work, and great places that you can make your job good. And people do get stuck in places that they feel like it's their only chance.
Yeah, yeah, it's a really important thing, and so sort of take us into that
Yeah.
sort of next steps, like I say, you're saying the
Mm.
consulting and then the workshops and things that you're doing, but certainly from creating things, and like say, and the author and the book and that kind of stuff, sort of take us into sort of how that sort of come together, certainly in terms of what you're doing now.
Yeah. So I had been the director, principal, it's called a director in that program, of a school for kids who didn't make it in public schools. For all those reasons I said earlier, they were traumatized, abused, exploited, neglected. Schools never worked for them. And that was where I had that toxic boss. So I've been doing that many years. And I've been doing a little writing. I've always done a little writing in my life, had a couple articles, small articles published. And the teaching staff said they wanted a last meeting with me. And I thought, aren't we done with all the goodbyes? And they had done this, and they did this lovely ceremony in which they went around the room, each of them, and talked to me and talked to each other about, each one spoke about a kid we had worked with in the school, and the work we had done, that, as a director I had facilitated, and how we had worked with that and what we had learned from working with that kid. And the staff went around and told all these stories, and I'm sitting there thinking, they're outlining a book. They're literally outlining a book. And as soon as I could, I went home and brain dumped everything they had said. I thought of all the kids, and I had a list of 20 kids and the stories from them, and that became my first book. It was like, oh, there aren't many books about working with kids like that, and specifically about how, as we say, there's no magic. And the title of the book's called Hanging In. It was like, how do you hang in as kids grow? And one of the things we learned in the work was that people don't change, but they grow. And you set up contexts within which kids come, in which they have support, in which they have some voice and in which they are supported for challenges. It's not like they just come in and you give them, a pacifier and say just sit there. Like you do want to give them have work to do, valid work to do, and you need to have predictable supports when they bump into something. And to be in good relationships with them. All of those things that make what we call a safe and brave space in which kids can engage fully in this hard work of learning. And so that's been the next step of my work is how do we make classrooms, how do we make schools safe and brave places? I always wanted the school I ran to be better than the streets. And I wanted my classroom to be better than the hallways. I wanted these places that drew kids in which they didn't go in with anxiety about, is this going to work for me? And even kids who are fairly stable, who are, you know, the typical good student, will do even better in those spaces. So the work has been so in a lot of my consulting, in many ways, it's how do we support the system to support the teachers to create those spaces so the kids are the ultimate, recipients of that good work. So that brought me to the current chapter of my work has been about discipline and doing discipline better, so that it restores kids into their community. Um, Now, this is again where it's necessary for some, good for all. It is necessary for kids who are on the margins, for whom, they're hanging on to school just because they know they're supposed to. It's never quite worked for them. And if the discipline system is one more step of alienation, one more step of not being understood, one more step of falling behind, it's not a good system. For kids who are generally good kids, even for them, if you don't learn from the experience of the discipline, it's just a step away. But for the kids who are on the margins, it's a particularly significant. There's a saying that dropping out of school is not an event, but it's a process. And it's a process that unfolds over many, many years. We've got to keep these kids in. There's a great risk to not having a high school diploma in the States, at least I can speak to.
Mm.
You used to be able to raise a family without a high school diploma years ago, not anymore. So when we have millions of kids who drop out of school every year, that's a burden to us all as a country, as a community. So helping more kids hang in is really important. So the discipline issue is really significant because it's where a lot of kids sort of get ground up in the gears.
And I think,
So that's where I am now.
yeah, I mean, it makes a lot of sense. And I think from what you're sort of saying, I love the fact that the idea of growth and the idea of a time factor, because like I say, no one turns up one day and suddenly has an issue or whatever. It's a
Right.
multiple factors and multiple situations. And I think understanding that, you know, the discipline comes in terms of, as I imagine you better explain more, in terms of sort of that sort of course correction, as it were. But if you're constantly setting the boundaries in the environment up to begin with to grow and to be supportive, I guess the two things work hand in hand, and then you start to see the benefits in lots of different ways.
Right. There's an article, you can find it on my website, which I'll mention is jeffreybenson.org, really easy. And it's my article that it didn't go viral like a Taylor Swift song, but it made it around a lot. It's called 100 Repetitions, and basically some kids need us 100 times to be able to say to them, we believe in you, we love you, we trust you, we think inside of every person there is a better self that can emerge through coming to school on a regular basis and being in this environment that cares for you, that will still hold you accountable. And I want to talk about that. But in the end, we know that if you hang in, we're going to hang in with you, and that you will grow. And the article says that some kids, you need to say that 100 times every day they come into school. You have to say, "Good morning. I'm so glad you're here." They don't believe it at first. They've come across too many adults who have just not taken good care of them, who have not noticed them, who have not gone the extra mile that these kids need coming into the building. So you can check that out, 100 repetitions. So that's part of it. Mark, you're right. It's a growth thing. It's not a change thing. And some kids, you just need to hang in a little longer. We need to set up a system that says to teachers, and this is an important part. If Mark, you were a teacher in my school, I would say you are not charged with curing a kid because there is no cure. Your job is to come in every day and recreate this culture, this classroom that supports kids to grow. And then your job is to just work that system every day. But to expect you to change kids, no, nobody knows how to do that. So I'll come around to the discipline part a little bit around because you mentioned something about that. That there are better things to do than what we currently do in terms of. I always think of discipline as people think of as punishment, and there's not good outcomes. We have a lot of evidence that punishing kids does not produce good outcomes. But it's sort of like there's been this sweet soda that everyone's been drinking for a long time that ultimately isn't good for your health, but everyone's used to it. And we're coming along and saying we've got a better drink. It gives you better outcomes, and it's hard to get people to sip it because they're so used to this current drink they have, which is the discipline of punishment. Holding kids accountable is not the same as punishing them. So maybe I'll start there because I want to sell anyone who's a skeptic about this that we should ask the same hard questions of our current system of disciplining as we would of any new system, um, and that the goal of discipline is to hold kids accountable. Some people think when we do restorative discipline, kids get away with stuff. And I always say, oh, they don't get away with anything. I actually think sending kids to detention, which is a place in the States where if you've misbehaved in school, they send you to a room where you can spend part of their whole day. It's a form of punishment. The notion is that you're being excluded and you feel shame and guilt and you want to go back and do better, but not if you don't have better tools to do that. Um, that's not a really good way to hold kids accountable. Holding kids accountable actually means that they have to repair the harm done. And this is the most significant piece of this work. It's not about the rule that was broken or how long you will be excluded, as if the longer you're excluded, the more you're going to want to get back into school, but that you repair the harm that you did. So, Mark, if you kicked over a waste paper basket in anger, you clean up the trash. And then we sit and talk with you about what will be different next time. So if you want to kick it over, how do you deal with your frustration? We're going to give you a plan to deal with your frustration that isn't about disrupting the class. But the first thing you have to do is clean up the trash. And maybe and depending on you, the kids, the age, because it's all so age dependent, and this is an important part. There's a way that we want you to be able to be welcomed back by your peers in the class. If you don't repair the harm, you can't be forgiven. And if you can't be forgiven, you're not made whole. Sending kids to detention, suspending them, punishing them, shaming them, does not let kids be forgiven. And that's such a significant part of Mark, I want you brought back into the class feeling whole, feeling like you are welcome back. We want you back. To do so, you have to repair the harm and you have to be forgiven. And there's many ways to do that. And I want to say this is a way better product than the product we have now of punishing and excluding kids and shaming kids. That works for a few kids, I will say. Kids who are desperate to do well in school, whose families' values match the school's values, kids who have done well in school already, who feel like this is their path. For them, being shamed is so bad that they will say, I'll do anything not to do that again. But for a lot of kids, that it just is one more step of alienation. They don't learn anything from being punished, except a lot of kids, what they learn is, how do I get away with that without getting caught? Because the real problem was that I got caught, not that I not that I harmed something that matters to me. So if school matters to kids, then harming that relationship to the teacher, to your peers, to the institution, to your own evolving sense of self, that matters. If we don't make that connection, it doesn't matter that you harm something. Just don't get away with it next. Just get away with it next time. Be
Yeah.
more clever. Be sneakier. It's a better product. Restorative discipline is a better product, and it feels better as a teacher too.
Well, I guess the thing is that what you're doing is you're creating the environment so that the person can be themselves and then start to make those choices to want to be better, to want to start to learn, to want to engage in the class, to be part of the community.
Mm.
And then, like you say, then it becomes a growth thing. So that was going to look different for every person, you know, whether the grades get better, whether the discipline gets better, whether the enthusiasm gets better. It's going to look different for everybody. But at least
Mm.
if you're on that path, then it gives you a guiding light of where you're going to go
Right.
in the next day, week, month, year, or whatever that is, or even sort of beyond school as well. As soon as the person's disengaged and completely not interested in what's going on and wants to kick the bin because they want to be in detention because they don't want to engage in anything, I mean, the rest of it becomes irrelevant, doesn't it? Because they're not going to be, they don't have the tools, like you said, to be able to give themselves the best chance that they can have to move forward, whether they really want to or not. I think everyone does want to or not. They just don't see
Right.
that way forward.
Right. The goal of holding kids accountable, which is not the same as punishing them, is to rebuild or continue to build their relationship to the institution, to the classroom, to the teachers, to their peers. So, Mark, if you had a student who was struggling with that, and they were 8 years old, whatever grade you would call that, in England, in the States, their third grade, you may not finish that task, but you're going to take that the next teacher, maybe me the next year. You've done the work of pulling that kid towards the institution. So then I might get the kid in ninth grade when they're 9 years old, and I'm going to continue the kid to pulling them towards the institution through helping them understand their accountability, hoping they're going to find successes and feel like you get a virtuous cycle. Things are better, so I'm going to keep trying hard. So things are better, so I'm going to keep trying hard. I want to talk about one specific spot around this, and if for those teachers who are listening, I want to be very respectful of this difficult moment. And this is where I start the work when I do this work in schools, and it's the first chapter of the book, Hacking School Discipline Together, and it's the together part that there was a prior book just called Hacking School Discipline. I didn't write it, and the missing part was how do you do it as a school. So it's not everyone in the individual classes. So if Mark has a kid or two in his class who are really difficult and struggling and who are disruptive, there's a moment when you're a teacher and the lesson is starting to go a little off the rails because you have a disruptive student and you're struggling to know how many times can I remind this kid? How many times can I help this kid before the class is beginning to suffer, where there's the harm is to the lesson? And you don't know as a teacher, if I send this kid out of the classroom to the principal of the school, will the principal say, "Nice job, Mark, that was exactly good"? Or will the principal say, "Why are you sending this kid to me?" And that's what I often hear. Principals say to me, "Jeffrey, I don't know why Mark sent this kid to me. That's a job Mark should have taken care of in the classroom." And I hear from Mark, "I don't know when I'm supposed to send a kid out. I don't know if I will be praised or criticized for doing that." And so the first piece of this work is to get the teaching staff and the administration of the school to have an agreement about when is it okay and when should I send a kid out. Because truthfully, there are times you absolutely should send kids out of class. The lesson's being disrupted. And we don't let one kid drag everyone down. But I need to know as a teacher that that's okay at that moment. I need to know what's mine to handle and what's the administration, what's the principal's job to handle. That's the first step to calm everyone down because that moment is so tense for everybody. And it also makes for disconnect and conflict between the school leaders and the teachers who we'd want to be on the same page. And this is where they get pulled off the same page. So the kid leaves the room finally. Mark sends the kid to the principal. 10 minutes later, they come back. Mark doesn't know what happened. Did the principal just pat the kid on the head and say, "Oh, you poor kid. Yeah, Mark's not a good teacher." Or did the principal shame the kid? Did the principal call the parents up? Who knows? So the teachers don't know to trust the principals. Or maybe the kid acts up again later in the day and the Mark thinks, "Oh, the principal doesn't know what he's doing," or something. So this communication between the people outside of the classroom and the people in the classroom is where we start the work. And then what we say to everyone, we say to the principal, "Okay, a kid is sent to you. What do you have in your toolkit to work with the kid besides just sending them to detention or suspension? How can you begin to help the kid repair the harm?" So the kid comes back to the classroom with a plan to repair the harm. And for Mark, who may not send a kid from the class, same thing. All right, you have the kid now. You're going to be the one who holds the kid accountable. How do you help hold that kid accountable without shaming the kid or, suspending them or keeping them in from recess or something? How do you help that kid repair the harm and then build up their skills? So the first step, however, is getting everyone on the same page about what are the behaviors, what behaviors belong to whom, and then what do you do when you get those kids besides just punish them? I want to keep coming back to this. How do you truly hold them accountable so that they repair the harm that was done, earn forgiveness, and be pulled back into the community? And when I say that again, I want to say, and it is a better product than what we currently do.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense, and I can imagine that the sort of work that you do collaboratively, like say, because you can write the book and you can talk to people, but that kind of being involved and actually being part of that change or that kind of learning growth within a school must be really transformational, because I guess the thing is that it's only when someone external or someone with that sort of bird's eye view is able to have those conversations in the right way to the principal and the teacher and all the people involved that everyone gets that buy-in from someone who's got that understanding and wisdom without it being that you're my boss or you're this or you're that. And so you can start to sort of meld these things together without sort of too many difficulties.
Yeah, it's a thrilling part of my work. And it's one of my favorite things to do is, and there's a part of the new book is a little about the story of a committee that's working together. So the way to do this is to have a committee of teachers, support services, whether they're counselors or whatever in the school, and administration who sit around a table regularly and say, how will we take this school through this path? And being a facilitator of those meetings, so much fun, so interesting, so challenging. Um, One of my favorite parts of the many parts of that, is getting everyone to realize that they all do have power in certain ways. And to say, for instance, sometimes the teachers will say to the principal, why don't you just do this now? Tell everyone they have to do this. And the principal can say, because it won't work. And the teachers will realize, all right, principals just can't tell people what to do and just change people. And the principal say, or I don't have the political capital right now. I'm going to be asking a lot of the staff, can they follow through? Do we have the systems to support them in following through? This isn't the time for me to make that dictate. Sometimes the principal will come in and say, all right, I'm ready to do this. And the staff will say, no, the teachers aren't ready to hear this yet. Let us go back out and talk to our peers more. We haven't done the work with our peers to get them to understand the step we want to take. So there's this fabulous collaboration. So in the process of supporting schools of learning how to do a discipline system better, I have a secondary agenda, which is helping them do the next thing better and the next thing, because it's going to be another initiative. I want them to learn, and I'm not saying this in as if I'm standing above them. It's work we do collaboratively, and we all see it evolve in front of us. What have we learned from working together? And in almost all these cases, the relationships are better. People go forward more. They understand the change process more. And it was possibly my favorite part of writing the book. It goes through the chronology of the change. So it's do this at the beginning of the year, then you do this in October, November, you do this in January, kind of a menu. And at the end of each chapter is the story of this committee. It's like a little short story that happens through the book, a little novella. And you get to meet the characters and you get to see how they evolve in their relationships and the struggles they have until they come to this point of, we're ready now. We've worked as a team and we're ready to give the school the plan. And that was my favorite part, to get to take people from all my years of doing work in schools and put them around the table in my imagination. And then it was like a role play. They would all kind of talk about what was at hand. And I felt like I knew the people around the table. And from what readers have told me, they felt like they recognized all those people around the table from all their years in school, which was my favorite part of writing the book.
Yeah, I can imagine that. And
Yeah.
just listening to it, it just strikes me of a couple of things. One, it reminds me of that undercover boss program, in as much as it's that you only really know what everyone's happening in your organization when you've experienced it, not as your actual job, but as a different job. And you're obviously talking about it vice versa as well. Teachers sort of understanding a principal's position where it was. And I think understanding that bigger picture, like say through the communication, is important. And it also reminded me of a podcast, quite a few, probably 2 or 3 years back now, where we were talking about the idea of empathy and understanding people's situations, because only at
Mhm.
that point are you able to take a different standpoint. And I think in this particular scenario, it was related to children, and they all wrote something that was happening in their lives. It wasn't named. It was all just done on a piece of paper, put into a hat, and then people were able to bring it out of the hat, as it were, and sort of say, okay, so this person, not knowing who it is, there's someone in the class who's struggling with X. Maybe there's a parent that's ill. Maybe they're looking after somebody. Maybe they've not eaten that day, whatever it happens to
Mhm.
be. And then all of a sudden, as a collective, as a class, you suddenly realize there might be a reason that there's someone who's struggling that you didn't know was struggling. And your whole perception of what your community, your world looks like is suddenly very different. And then it becomes, like I say, a wholesome thing that you can support people with, you can grow with, you can be helpful, you can get help if you need it. And
Yeah.
that's a whole different way of living, isn't it?
Yeah. And I mean that's the work for teachers of kids who struggle in school is those moments of empathy which helps you hang in with them. Because honestly, I'm going to, again, every teacher knows this, that there are students who are really hard to teach, whose behavior makes it hard for the class to run. And some days those kids are absent and the class runs way better. And the next day the kid comes in, and you see the kid at the door and you have to say, I missed you yesterday. I'm so glad you were back, because we're professionals. And that's our job, is to realize that every kid needs to be welcomed into that space, to build that empathy. This is one of the moments when I watched a whole team of teachers have an aha of empathy. There was a student in the school who was very disruptive to the school, and this kid was 9 years old and was having temper tantrums through the day and very disruptive, and sometimes literally like rolling on the floor as a kid that age, which is not really developmentally what you should be doing at that age. And we were after school talking about the kid, and I was a consultant to the school and thinking about what are we going to do. And clearly the teachers were tired out. And then this one teacher said, when I was watching him rolling on the floor today, I realized of all the people in the world, that's probably the last person in the world I would like to be right now. I'm going home. I know I have a decent house. I have a good job. I'm going to have a good dinner. I don't know where this kid is going home to, but to be his age rolling around on the floor like that, I just realized who would want to be that kid? And you felt the whole room just go, oh, right. Like, how to, yes, we've built up our anger, our frustration, and it took that away. And it's okay to be angry and frustrated sometimes, of course. But you also need that moment of, but
Yeah.
who's this kid in front of me? How do we help this kid? What's within our toolkit to help this kid? Um, how do we hold out the hope
Yeah.
for this kid? And the belief that inside every kid, inside every person, is a better person who can evolve, who can you can grow into. And our job is to help kids grow into that better person.
Yeah, absolutely. Perfectly put. And I'm always curious, especially someone who's had such a different career as yours, like say through those different sort of journeys. Is there an education experience or a teacher that you remember that had an impact, and do you sort of still draw onto that as you sort of like say been doing your writings and doing your coaching?
Oh, so many. I mean, a handful, not so many. I wish I had more, but a few. I'll, I'll, I'll speak about somebody in college, even though I had ones prior to that. But this was a moment when moving from being a late adolescent to being a young adult, and to feeling like I was a young adult felt really important to me versus I was just an old teenager. And a teacher at college, one of the professors, and after a class, and he was a beloved instructor. He said to me, "You know, Jeffrey, you said something in class. It's really making me think and wonder. I really appreciated your comment because it kind of stopped me and made me think, wow, that was that moment of I said something that mattered to this other person who everyone so admires. And it wasn't like my ego exploded, but it was more that moment of affirmation felt so powerful that an idea I had was worthy, um, mattered to me a great deal. And I think you're going to ask me a question about a book as well, because that would just take me to a
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, feel free to sort of work into that. Yeah.
yeah. So it's funny because as I was saying that, I was like, oh yeah, there is a book that articulated that for me. Um, it was one of those books when I was becoming a teacher that I read, and it was like, oh, this makes sense to me. And the title of the book, it's one of those books that the title tells you what the book is about, even though the book is nice. It's called The Having of Wonderful Ideas. And this notion that the goal for education is for kids to realize that they have wonderful ideas, that not just that they can memorize and tell you exactly back what you're thinking, but that their own thoughts, their own brains, their own construction of knowledge is why we have brains. You know, as if there are 50 people listening to this now, all 50 of you are having a slightly different experience of listening to me because of your backgrounds, because of what you do for work, because of your belief systems or whatever. And it's engaging with those in all slightly different ways. So even if you could all say to me, Jeffrey said these words, each of you would be taking slightly different meanings from those words and hopefully having some interesting, if not wonderful, ideas that help you in some fashion. So, The Having of Wonderful Ideas is an essay in the book called The Having of Wonderful Ideas. And it was that moment when my college professor affirmed that I had had a wonderful idea, not just for me, but for him. It was like, oh, I want all kids in schools, whatever age, even as my job as a coach and consultant of adults, is to realize that your brains create wonderful ideas that are necessary for you to live your life. You know, our brains grow to be the brains we each need to cope with the life we have. And each of us needs to hear the wonderful ideas that we're constructing to help us cope with our lives and to believe in those ideas, and to use resources to learn more, to create more wonderful ideas that help us live our own lives well. Um, so, yeah, that book, that experience came to me of like, that's the goal, to help people honor their own ability to construct wonderful ideas that they need to live their lives.
And it's suddenly a very different experience, even listening to you now, in terms of what a school experience is like when you're thinking of it in that way, rather than I didn't get 100% in that test. My life and
Yeah.
my possible future is over. I mean, just the whole way you're going about it and understanding it just completely changes, and it goes from a
Yeah.
positive, sort of nourishing kind of way of living your life, like say, and the growth into today and tomorrow and where you're heading, as
Yeah.
opposed to that sort of fear aspect, which often comes with that sort of test grade ideas and that. So yeah,
Yeah.
I love it. It's put so beautifully.
There's a notion, and this is some data on this, that 90% of the questions teachers ask kids in school is tell me what I'm thinking. Guess what the teacher's thinking? 90% of the questions. So I work with teachers and in my own practice as a coach, and I teach college courses and things like that. I always say, what are you thinking now? I know what I'm thinking. What are you thinking now? Because that's, I want to know how your brain is engaging, because then I can ask you another question and push your thinking and help you find that spot where you have to struggle with a challenge that's worthy for your brain. Um, yeah, I used to say to my students, because it takes a long time, this is the 100 repetitions of saying to kids, don't guess what I'm thinking. I'll tell you what I'm thinking, but I'm bored with what I'm thinking. I have all these beautiful young minds in front of me who have all these weird, crazy, wonderful ideas. Tell me what you're thinking. My day's much better than just repeating back what I already know. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, it's beautiful that.
Mm.
What's the best piece of advice you've ever been given, or indeed, is there maybe a piece of advice you give your younger Jeffrey, sort of looking back now?
Well, there are two different ones. There's advice I'd give to a lot of people, and then advice I give to myself. The advice I'd give to myself was, "Hey, look, we're going to make it." There were times in my life, like when I was leaving jobs and searching, would I actually, you know, be solvent economically for my whole life? Would I be able to raise a family? And I'd want to say, "Don't worry, excuse me, you made it. So keep doing what you were doing when
Yeah.
you were young." Um, for other folks, I mean, it's sort of the same, there's a little overlap there. Um, but I want to talk especially people who work in schools. It's about the power of listening, about putting down everything when there's a kid who needs you or a peer or something, and just fully being there to listen. And we all know about the people in our lives who fully give of themselves as listeners and how profound that is. And whenever you can, to realize that you're in this moment, in this space with people in which listening is profound. You don't have to always solve their problems. Um, the solution is largely inside of them. But to give people a chance to be heard, that's the flip side. I mean, the part of, again, of affirming who they are and letting them feel like their brains and their expression of themselves is a significant part of helping them grow into their better selves. So being just an open, curious listener. I have to remember myself who, I think I have so many great ideas to realize that sometimes I don't need to give a solution. I just need to let the person work through their own process.
Yeah, absolutely, and can be so difficult sometimes, can't it? He says from his own experience,
So
wanting to
hard.
do
Well,
that.
I could solve that for you. It's not true. I probably can't.
No, exactly. I can give you an answer which didn't work for me either, but we can chat about it. But oh dear.
Yeah.
Obviously, the acronym FIRE is really important for us here at Education on Fire,
Mm,
and by that we mean feedback, inspiration, resilience, and empowerment.
love that.
What is it that strikes you when you see that?
Oh, it's so much parallel to my work. Um, I want to talk about a little practice in particular. Again, my work in schools being so much of what I've done. It's around that word empowerment. Um, a lot of work I do in schools now is part of all of it's all of one piece in some ways, is helping kids know what they can advocate for, how we can say to kids, it's okay to ask for things. Is it okay? And you have to be explicit about this. I have a long list of things kids can do. Can they ask to hear directions again? Can they ask to sit somewhere else in the class? Can they ask to have 2 minutes to take a break? Can they ask to have a pencil instead of a pen or a marker or something like that? Can they ask to get a model to see what the product is we want? And oftentimes teachers will say to me, "Oh yeah, kids know they can do that." And I would say, "How many times have they actually done that?" We have to make it very explicit that it is okay to ask to hear directions again. I would just stop with that one. So many kids feel like I can't because I was supposed to know it, and it's shaming, or they'll be, oh, it's like, I'd like to be sure I know the directions. Could you repeat that again? Wouldn't we want every kid to say that? So we have to be very explicit to help kids know that their role in school is to be active learners. So, in some ways, you can't give people power, but you can create a context within which they are supported to use their power, their ability to advocate. Um, so yeah, so I've been leaning heavily into that space because I think most kids come into school thinking their job is to be passive recipients as opposed to active co-creators of their learning experience. So they need to know what they can ask for. Is it okay for me to set up my learning space in a way that will work for me?
So important, and I think it really ties in so beautifully with what you said before about the community, the working with the principals, working with the teachers, because you want that to be across the board. You want it to be supported in different classes. You want it to be supported in different ages. And I think sometimes, like I say, that takes time depending on the community that you have and the people involved in that. And then that's part of that growth again from everyone, like I say, from the pupils through to the staff as well. So, yeah, so much great wisdom and so much excitement from my point of view, because I just think, like I say, if every school could be like that, if the learning experience could be like
That's
that,
the dream.
it's gonna change lives, like you say. And it's not about can we get the grades up. All those
Right.
sorts of things take care of themselves if that's indeed something you're interested in doing.
Right.
But that's
Right.
the key.
The grades are not an impediment to this. If you're doing this work, they go hands in hand. The grades will be valued. I always say to teachers, the kids will do better. You have to invest a little in this. Yeah, it's a better product. I'm always a salesman for a better product.
Yeah,
Trying to do undoing 100 years of a mediocre product.
yeah,
But
indeed.
no
Well,
fault to the teachers. People work really hard. The institution isn't quite as flexible for kids as it should be.
yeah, exactly. And I think it's got it harder. So, well, Jeffrey, keep up the great work. I mean, it sounds amazing. And just remind people again the name of the book and also obviously the website and where people can sort of get
Happy to do
involved
so.
with
So
your work.
the easiest way to be in touch with me and all my books and articles, my website, jeffreybenson.org. Really simple. Um, Links to all my articles there. We've dug them all up and got them so you don't have to search around the whole internet. We got them there. Links to all the books. The new book I'm excited about, Hacking School Discipline Together. Just came out 2 weeks ago. It's off to a good start. People are buying it. I'm real excited. Hopefully it'll help. That's always the goal.
Fantastic. Well, keep up the great work. Thank you so much for chatting to us and sharing it with us today. And yeah, look forward to chatting again soon.
I hope so, Mark. Bye-bye.
I really hope you enjoyed today's conversation, and thank you so much for being part of the Education on Fire community. Links and details of today's podcast are in the description, and if you would like to support the show with a small donation, that's a wonderful way to help me bring you more creative and inspiring learning. Please visit educationonfire.com/support, and remember, education is not the filling of a pail, but the lighting of a fire.